Hello, dear listeners. I think today's podcast discussion may be the best representation yet of how differently two women of different generations experience the same movie. This kind of movie, this kind of discussion, represents a big part of why we do what we do with the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we do. Let's get to it.
Hello and welcome to Woman Inherits the Earth, a mother-daughter podcast about the representation of women in movies and television. I am Tess Adair, a writer and the author of the paranormal mystery series The Karanzan Chronicles and Beth's daughter.
And I am Beth Van Buren, Tessa's mother and also a writer. In the podcast today, we are discussing Annie Hall. Made in 1977, it is 1 hour and 33 minutes long, and I am not going to complain about that time. The perfect time. Written by Woody Allen and Marshall Brickman, and actually Marshall Brickman doesn't get the credit he deserves for all the witty dialogue that he has written for Woody Allen over the years. Directed by Woody Allen, it's probably his signature film. It was produced by Jack Rollins and Charles Jaffe, who were his longtime producing company. Stars Woody Allen, Diane Keaton, Tony Roberts, Carol Kane, Shelley Duvall, Paul Simon, Christopher Walken in what may be one of his breakout roles, and Colleen Dewhurst. A brief summary, and this is a very brief summary. Annie Hall is a movie about a relationship that has ended, told in snippets, out of sequence, with lots of Allen narration and joke telling. It is set in the 1970s in both New York and Los Angeles. I'll just jump right in here and say that this is the film really that set the tone and look and feel of Woody Allen's movies going forward. Prior to that, in his earlier films, it was Take the Money and Run, Sleeper, Love and Death, and a couple of others that nobody even remembers the names of anymore. Annie Hall, was really a major new direction for him. It wasn't just a movie based on a play. It wasn't just a way for him to get to. He was a stand-up comic before he made movies. He was a comic, and a lot of his earlier movies, that's what he did in them. He's just, and in this movie, his character is a stand-up comic, but it's not about his comedy. It is whether or not you like it or not, there's a real story here.
It's a more personal work than his previous work.
Yeah, he's really starting to do storytelling here. He hadn't really done that before. It was really just more of movies. His previous movies were like a vehicle for his comedy, but this has a real storyline to it. It also features 4 of his signature jokes. This is 1977, so this is 49 years ago, and in those 49 years, these jokes have grown into their own. They've got like their own history because they're just such famous jokes, and some of them he didn't even write. The first one is, the food is terrible in such small portions. Some of these he got from Groucho Marx.
He says that. I think the one that he says. Well, actually, he says it's often attributed to Groucho Marx, but it actually appears, I think, in like Freud's work. It's the one where I don't want to belong to any club that would have me as a member.
And I think that is Groucho adapted Freud for that, and Woody stole it. So, and that was the next one. That's number 2. And number 3 is, those who can't teach, those who can't teach Jim, which I heard a lot in my 20s and 30s, and I now think is kind of insulting and slanderous, because there were a lot of really good teachers out there. So this is just kind of a knock to teachers, but it's a very famous joke. And so the last one is, my brother's crazy. Why don't you turn him in? I would, but I need the eggs. And in fact, it's such a famous joke that one of his books, Woody wrote a lot of books in the 70s and 80s, and one of his books has that in the title, I Needed the Eggs, or something like that. There are also about half a dozen famous quotes. So I'm just going to get all this stuff out in the beginning so it kind of helps to acknowledge the importance of Annie Hall in film history. I love being reduced to a cultural stereotype. That's Carol Kane, who is wonderful in this film. I'm a big Carol Kane fan.
I was pleasantly surprised to see her because I'm really familiar with her much more recent work. So in my mind, I don't know that I like had any image of her as like such a young person. So when she came on screen, I paused it and I was like, wait, I know who that is. I know who that is. Oh my God, I think that's Carol Kane.
It is. And I don't know when her career started, but this is one of her earliest roles. She's really young in this movie.
Yeah, people my age will probably know her as the crazy older lady in Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. She's also currently in Star Trek Strange New Worlds.
Yes.
Both great roles. And in both of them, she's playing kind of a kooky older lady who you can't entirely, like, understand. You know, a lady who has lived a wild life. In Strange New Worlds, you know, she's like a nearly immortal alien who has lived, like, many, many wild lives. And she's like a genius, but you never know what she's gonna pull from. And, you know, a lot of the time she'll suddenly reveal whatever she's doing to be, like, silly or stupid or, like, kind of too lighthearted for the scenario. She's a really fun actor.
She's just a few years older than me. She was born in 1952, so this would have been one of her first movies. And she did these early movies in like the 70s and 80s, and then it felt like there was a gap. And in the last 20 years, she has had like a resurgence in her career and those kind of roles. And there have been quite a few of them. So she was in Wicked, Poker Face. She was in Poker Face and Gotham. I guess her resurgence has been in television roles, but she's awesome. So anyway, so she's in this, and she has the line, "I love being reduced to a cultural stereotype." And then, of course, there's a famous line where he's talking about Marshall McLuhan, and we will talk more about the Marshall McLuhan part later on. Well, he says, he's quoting him, and he says, tells the guy behind him, "You have that all wrong, and here, I have him right here." That's the famous quote. The one that I've always loved, and I still use it pretty much all the time, is, "We can walk to the curb from here," when Annie parks her car crazily. And actually, I bought a convertible VW Bug because I love the one in this movie so much. This movie had a big impact on me when it came out. So I would periodically, I wanted to get a bumper sticker at one point, have it made that said, "We can walk to the curb from here," and put it on the car. I never did it. La-di-da. That's another one. "I'm going to take another in a series of cold showers." That's a line that I know I've heard lots of times, and it's Woody's. And this one I don't really like so much, but I've heard it a lot. "Don't knock masturbation. It's sex with someone I love." So that last one is, actually those last two speak to some of the darkness that's in this movie, and we'll get to that later on.
Well, I do want to talk about that a little bit right now. I don't really want to go any further without talking about the sexual abuse allegations against Woody Allen. I'm not going to get too deep into it, but if for anyone who somehow doesn't know, Woody Allen was accused of sexual assault by his adoptive daughter, Dylan Farrow. I will try to find the article that she wrote kind of detailing her experience and link it in the description. Woody Allen also has a very powerful and litigious PR team, so we're not going to get too deep into it, and we are going to say that these are allegations. I personally think that, considering the allegations and the fact that he did then marry his adoptive daughter, Sunyi Previn, and the fact that he has repeatedly written movies where older men have sexual and romantic relationships with younger women, to me, these things combine to paint a pretty damning picture of him as a person. Whether or not you believe the sexual abuse allegations specifically, he has a history of really romanticizing relationships with a huge age gap and power imbalance. I think the most famous example of this is the film Manhattan, where he plays a self-insert character who has a relationship with a teenager, and it is portrayed as a positive, a good relationship. So yeah, at a minimum, he is clearly pro having relationships with extremely young women, and he has contributed to an overall culture that has romanticized that kind of power imbalance, and specifically that has denied the power imbalance inherent in that. He writes these characters like these young women know what they're doing and are completely on equal footing with the much older men. And that is propaganda. That is pedophile propaganda, in my opinion. So, like I said, we have to say alleged. He has not been convicted of anything. I think that there's enough evidence there to paint a pretty clear picture of him as a person. But, libel being what it is, we cannot say anything definitively. I would just say that I think it's important to know these things. Personally, I have no interest in seeing any more of his work. I mean, to be fair, I've seen a couple of his somewhat more recent movies, and I also just don't think he has very much left to say as a writer and a filmmaker. But I also think it is a cultural negative to continue to prop him up. I think he's kind of up there with Weinstein in terms of old, powerful men who have made Hollywood a bad place for women. And I do think that some of that is in the script of this movie. When I first saw this movie, I was a teenager, and I really liked it then, and I thought that it was really insightful. And at the time, I thought that it spoke to Woody Allen's incredible understanding of himself, because I thought that it's very clearly about a self-insert character. The guy's name is Alvy. And he's played by Allen, and he very clearly talks like him and has a similar career. So it's very easy to interpret the movie as kind of a psychological self-assessment. And when I was a teenager, I thought it was a really good, deep one. And then when I rewatched it in college, I came away thinking that it seemed to me that he maybe had not really actually understood himself as much as he wants the audience to think. And this last time that I watched it, I thought, yeah, no, he has either completely missed the point, or he has intentionally written this so that the character gets to completely miss the point. And I also find there are just a couple of snippets in the film that I think kind of speak to one of his overall weaknesses as a writer. I think he's really good at convincing you that he's doing a really deep self-assessment and that he's got a really brutal, honest opinion of himself. But at the same time, he writes these self-insert characters who are surrounded by people that constantly confirm the character's biases and beliefs. And he's the writer, so he gets to decide what these people are like. And the scene in this movie that I felt was the clearest example of that is a scene where the character, Alvy, is walking around upset after the breakup and feeling like his whole grasp of the world is falling apart, and he stops two random people on the street who look like a happy couple, and he asks them, "How could you possibly make it work when life is so complicated?" And they both basically tell him, "Oh, we're empty-headed dum-dums, so it's easy for us." No one, that's obviously not literally what they say, but they basically say, I have no thoughts and ideas, so I don't have very high expectations, so it's pretty easy. And then the guy, also agrees. And it's just I know that it's sort of a wish fulfillment moment, but it also feels very representative of how Allen writes a lot of side characters. He will just write these side characters to be dumber than his main character, because he really wants you to feel like the Woody Allen character in the film is the smartest guy there. Even if he keeps self-sabotaging, he must always be the preeminent intellectual in the room.
Well, I've been writing notes as you were talking. He's very charismatic in this movie, and he's funny. He's a funny writer. He writes funny things. His assessment of himself or observations about himself, it's funny. It's witty. And he's charismatic, and that would be enough to make a teenager think it was smart. And you weren't alone. I saw this movie in 1978 when I was 20 and had the same take on it. It's very funny. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening in the film. A lot of different characters who are interesting, and I would just insert here, and we may talk about this more later. All of the women are so much more interesting than any of the men. Just put it out there. The women is, and that is something he's known for.
Yeah.
He uses really good actresses in his movies, and he gives them meaty roles, which is why so many actresses want to work with him. And or was the case for a long time, because they weren't getting roles anywhere else.
It's not just about the roles, it's also the fact that working with Woody Allen is prestigious. Once you've worked with him, it almost doesn't matter what role he gives you. If you've worked with him, that's like a stamp of approval. It's like getting an Oscar. Like, that means that you've made it. And I say that in part because I've seen a couple of his more recent movies, and the roles aren't meaty anymore. They're pretty vapid.
No, they're not. I think the 70s and 80s were the best movies he made. But in this movie, in Annie Hall, there's a point where he is walking with he has a lot of walking discussions with Tony Roberts, and in one of them, Roberts' character admits that he is dating a 16-year-old girl.
Two.
And they have it.
He says
two. I missed that. Okay.
Two.
And
twins.
And they have this discussion, and it's like neither one of them says anything about how ridiculous that is, how young she is, how disgusting it is.
That it's illegal. How illegal it is.
How illegal it is. Yeah. But, and I would also say that we like this, if we like this movie, and I do, parts of it, it's because of Diane Keaton. It's because of the character Annie Hall. It's not because of Woody Allen. This is why I love this movie, or have always loved this movie. This time was an awakening for me. I hadn't seen it in decades, and I watched it, through the prism of much older maturity and all the history that has happened in between. So, and I saw things in it that I had never seen before. So
yeah, she is magnetic in this movie. She's wonderful to watch. She is what gets you through, and her performance is so naturalistic. Annie Hall feels like a really real character. And some of that is, in how unsure of herself she is. She's so...
Yes, at first,
yeah. But she's almost comically uncertain. Insecure, that's it. She's almost comically insecure. She's like tripping over herself. And honestly, in the first scene between her and Woody, when like she's very clearly like flirting with him and trying to figure out how to talk to him more, I honestly now find it kind of a head scratcher, just because she's so beautiful and he's this 40-year-old. He's not like ugly, but he's got kind of a big nose. He's not very tall. He's
not attractive.
He's not attractive.
He's not an attractive man. No.
You said charismatic. I think that's kind of right. He's magnetic. But I don't know if I would say charismatic, because I find him insufferable in this movie. Like, everything that he says, I did not laugh once during the watch of this movie. And part of that is that, a lot of these jokes have been said so many times that they're just not new anymore.
Right.
But I think also part of it was just like, now that I'm not a teenager, I mean, teenagers kind of love when people are mean, but now that I'm not a teenager, I'm just like, this man is unlikable. He is not nice. He's not smarter than everybody else, but he thinks he is. He has nothing but negative things to say all the time. And in that scene where Annie Hall clearly has a crush on him and is trying to figure out how to push that into something more, I'm just like, why? What do you like about him? I do not understand. He's barely said anything to you yet. He's not attractive, and he's just kind of vaguely sarcastic. You could walk out the door and meet 20 men who are more attractive and have that quality. It's not hard to find a sarcastic man. It's a little bit of a weird watch, because she is so likable.
That's nothing new. I think I had those same feelings about this movie 50 years ago when I first saw it, because I've never found him to be attractive.
Yeah,
I think he's funny, but he's not attractive. And in that scene where she's got her famous outfit on, with the floppy hat, the tie, and the vest, and he's putting his tennis gear away, he can barely be bothered to turn and talk to her. She
exactly
engage him in a discussion, and everything she says, he cracks a joke about or makes fun of. He's a very controlling character. Even when they get into a relationship and they clearly love each other, it's like she becomes his project.
Yeah.
He's going to make her better. He's going to make her smarter. He says she should take classes. And the process of doing that for her is eye-opening. It's not so much that she learns because he says she should learn, but when she takes his suggestions about taking classes, she begins to have her insecurity kind of evaporates. She becomes self-confident. She's almost like a representation in this movie of how a woman becomes a feminist. And I recognized it at the time because it happened to me. Women your age have the advantage of having grown up in an era that feminism was kind of a given. It might have been attacked, but women being able to work and have credit in their names and so many things. It's kind of been taken for granted.
Yeah.
But when I was growing up, it was not. And I lived through the second wave of feminism. It still was really not. By the end of the 70s, things were starting to change, but we weren't there yet. So what I saw in Annie was a woman who was making the same leap that I was making. And part of it's just, it's a coming of age thing. She's growing up. She's learning to like herself. She's learning to understand herself. And she does acknowledge at one point, he keeps making fun of how she needs to smoke a joint before sex. Or in the 70s were a time when casual drug use became a big thing. And, and actually the scene with the cocaine, that's another famous scene. And it was actually pretty funny. When I saw it originally, it wasn't as funny this time, but when he blows the cocaine all over the place. But this was an era when drugs were commonplace. Let's put it, casual, social things. Like the 50s, it was drinking, it was martinis, but by the 70s, it was really weed and cocaine. She's part of that scene, but he attacks her for it over and over again. And why do you need to do that? He sees it as a commentary on him as a sexual partner that she needs to relax before sex, rather than trying to ask her or talk to her about what's making her anxious. He just, he assumes that it's an attack on him, and then he makes her go to a psychiatrist. And let's get back to Freud here for just a minute. You were talking about how lacking in self-analysis he is. For somebody who's been in analysis for 15 years, which is what he claims, since he was 25, that's pretty extraordinary. It's like an endless thing for him. It's his crutch. It's his identity. It's who he is. He goes to therapy, but it's Freudian therapy. So let's get to that. That's what I'm trying to get to. It's Freudian therapy, and my lisp is coming through there with Freud's name, but it's Freudian therapy, and that's not really therapy. It's like a mind game almost. It's like
been largely debunked.
It has been largely debunked, but in the 70s it wasn't. It was starting to be debunked, but it's meaningless. It is meaningless. It's a discussion, an intellectual, if you want to call it that, or academic. It's an academic discussion between people about theories that nobody even believes in.
Well, and it kind of relates everything back to sex, which for Woody Allen and his character, that's actually the opposite of what he needs.
But it's a running theme in all his movies. But part of me thinks that his attitudes that come across in his movies, the attitudes about older men and younger women, come out of his belief in Freudian analysis. And I don't really know a lot about Freud, but it just smacks of it to me. And but to me, that's just an excuse. It's just a way to indulge someone's morally questionable attitudes about sex with young women, and I'm being nice by saying morally questionable.
Well, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about is the very first flashback scene, because I think it is really demonstrative of what's going on in this movie in a couple of ways. So we start off with Woody Allen talking directly to camera about how his relationship with Annie Hall has ended. And then we get a flashback scene we get a couple of them, but one of the first one is a flashback scene to him as a young boy in a classroom where he, out of nowhere, runs over and kisses this little girl. It looks like he kisses her on the mouth. And then the scene freezes and everyone talks to him about it. And the teacher says something like, how could you possibly have been so sexually aware as a child? And the little girl says something like, even Freud believed in a latency period. And the thing is they're painting it as the problem with him is that he's just too sexual. That's not the problem with what he did. He did not ask her permission and she did not want it. No one addresses this. He kissed her without permission. That is assault. And yes, he's a child in the scene, but the fact that even as an adult, he looks back on that and thinks, oh, the problem is just that I'm just so horny and I've always been so horny. No, the problem is that you didn't care about her consent. And it's wild that you as a 40-year-old still don't get that. And that's exactly what's going on in your relationship with Annie Hall, too. Well, and here's the other thing, the other side to that scene, because it's not just the problem. The problem is not just that he didn't ask her consent. That scene ends with him imagining what each of the children might be up to as adults, and he has them say it to camera. So he goes through a couple of the boys, and one of the boys is like, oh, I'm doing this for work. Another of the boys is like, I'm doing this for work. The last boy is like, oh, I got addicted to heroin, but I'm clean now. And then he does a girl, and all she says is, I'm into leather. So he imagines a career for each of the boys as adults, but for the girl, he imagines a sexual interest. And that's it. He can only view women through sexuality.
When you see this scene, when it happens, it's hilarious at first because
I didn't think
the girl she's got this, she says it with a straight face. She clearly is a child. She doesn't know what she's saying. And it is a funny scene until you think about it in those terms. Here's the thing. I just want to back up here a little bit and say that let's not forget that this movie is 50 years old and we're judging it today in retrospect, looking back at it and not judging it. We're just looking at it more realistically. Let's put it that way. I have seen it both when it came out and yesterday. So I'm picking up on a lot more things in the film that bother me. A lot of things in this film bother me. I am 50 years older than I was. I saw this movie when I was young. I hadn't had a lot of life experiences yet, and it was a different time. So when I was actually one of those girls in grade school that a boy kissed without permission, and it freaked me out. But at the time, boys didn't get in trouble for that kind of stuff. It was acceptable. Oh, he's just being a boy. Is this the way of the world? This is just boys and girls. No, it wasn't then, and it's not now, and it wasn't then. But mores were different, and getting people to get to the point where you and I are today about consent has been a 50-year process, and it's still not.
It's still going, yeah.
Yeah, it's still ongoing. So, and you're right. There are so many of these kinds of things in the film, and yet the film is also a product of its time. So, which is, in a sense, is a good thing. We have this to look back on, and we can say, "Oh, yeah, that's what was happening in the 70s." Yeah. Which, if we hadn't had this film or other films like it, it would be easy to forget. So, in that sense, Annie Hall's worth seeing, not just for Diane Keaton's performance, which is so brilliant, but to understand and remember that in the 60s and 70s, these kinds of sexual mores were accepted, and they were in some ways debilitating to women. I mean, it was a really hard era for and the thing is that the 60s, the sexual revolution and everything, people have always had sex outside of marriage, but in the 60s and 70s they talked about it and they admitted it. What's striking to me about this film in that regard, and that related to that topic, is how incredibly sexual this film is. Every time you turn around, somebody is discussing sex. I mean, the scene where he's just had sex with Shelley Duvall, and he's rubbing his jaw because he's obviously performed oral sex on her. This is 1977. I don't remember if I was astounded at that in 1977, but today I look back at it and think, I'm not even sure I see things like that in films today.
Well, I can tell you, I think you were astounded because you brought it up repeatedly. I knew about that scene before I'd ever seen the movie.
I think it bothered me. It wasn't that it was inappropriate. It's just that it was so different. But in retrospect, the whole film was just about sex.
Yeah.
So it's so much about sex. He's obsessed with sex throughout the film. And that's just one of the representations of it.
Well, and, part of what's happening in this movie is that there are kind of two very different stories going on. Because the story of Annie Hall as a character is a story of this woman kind of coming into her own and
Yeah.
essentially outgrowing the relationship she was in as she became the person that she became.
Yep, absolutely.
And I do think that is the story that's worth watching. I wish it got more of the airtime, and I wish that we got more of her perspective, because we kind of never really get her actual point of view. It's always from his point of view.
From his interpretation,
Yeah, and I think because of that, we never really get into the meat of the more interesting stuff and the meat of how she really feels about how he treats her. And then on the other hand, he is basically a character who is permanently stuck in place and cannot really move forward or grow. And part of that is because despite all of his therapy, he's unwilling to look at his actual problem. There's the scene where they're both talking to their respective therapists, and it's kind of like spliced together.
It is a good scene. Wise, it was really good.
But it's also cut in such a way as to allow Woody Allen's character, Alvy, to never actually have to face what's happening, what his problem is. Because I don't think he ever fully understands. I mean, he a little bit gets that she's outgrowing him, and that's why he's so jealous of her like relationship with a professor, which I never really goes anywhere. So she wasn't cheating on him with the professor. He just like saw them hug and became insanely jealous. And I think that is because he subconsciously understands that she is starting to outgrow him. But what he expresses as his discontent with the relationship, because they break up mutually. They both want to break up. And his discontent with the relationship is literally they only have sex 3 times a week, and he wants to have sex more often than that. And he doesn't think that that's too much to ask. And meanwhile, on her end, because we see these conversations at the same time, she doesn't even want to be having sex that often, which means that she's already compromising by having sex with him that often. And this is the thing. He doesn't get that her consent and her sex drive matters. He thinks because he wants to have sex more often, they should have sex more often. End of discussion. Because still, at 40, he has not understood that his sex drive is not the center of the fucking universe.
And he's never going to understand that. He's never going to understand himself. He is never going to grow and learn anything about himself. And the other difference in those two, scenes with her therapist is his therapist. Woody keeps saying these things that make us think you're just not paying attention at all. And his therapist is saying nothing. And then she's engaged with her therapist, and it's a conversation. They're going back and forth, and she's asking her questions, and you can see that Annie Hall is actually working through some of these things. She wants to get better. She doesn't want to keep going to a therapist. She wants this to be over with. She wants to figure it out, move on with her life, and be happy.
Yeah.
Woody Allen's character is stuck. He doesn't want to be happy, and he's never going to be.
Yeah, and it's almost like happiness is not even the goal for him. What he wants basically is to freeze her in place with him, because he kind of wants her. He wants to own her. And that's part of what comes up in the conversation where he's pissed that she hugged her professor, right? Because she points out to him that up until that point in their relationship, he has refused to commit at all. But as soon as he suspects that anyone else is slightly interested in her, he freaks out. And this is the other side to it. And there was no way that this was going to be a conversation in the 1970s, but like, if I am to take his sex drive at face value and not assume that the reason he wants to have sex so much is because he's an empty void of a person and sex is the only thing that shuts up the void for a minute, which is what I think is actually happening with this man. But there are people who have crazy sex drives. That is a reality for some people. So let's assume that that's what's going on with him. The fact of the matter is, you might not be able to be in a monogamous relationship if that is your sex drive. You might need to be open to polyamory if you need to have sex that often. And he clearly is not, because he could not let her date anybody else.
Well, and that also is another thing in this. He's a traditional male who was born in the 30s, and by the 70s, he's pretty much stuck in the morality of the era into which he was born. And that's never going to change, and it has never changed. And men were allowed to do anything they wanted in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and that includes sexually. if they had a good and faithful marriage and they went out and had sex with 10 other women, it wasn't frowned on. It wasn't, I mean, it was by the wives.
It was a man's prerogative.
But time marches on, and most people grow up or change or become to understand that certain kinds of behavior are just wrong.
Yeah.
And this is one of those.
And the thing is, the issue is equality, right? It's okay to be polyamorous, but you can't be polyamorous for you and not for my partners, right?
Yeah.
And like these men who were fucking around on their wives would have absolutely had a meltdown if their wives had an affair. So that's hypocrisy. The issue is hypocrisy and inequality. It's okay if you cannot commit yourself to a monogamous relationship, but you have to then understand that your partner is also allowed to be polyamorous, you know?
Yeah, while all of this sex stuff is happening in the film, he's also trying to portray Alvy as this intellectual, a pseudo-intellectual guy. And so let's get into Marshall McLuhan really quick while we're on this. He said they're standing in line. First of all, how many times did he take her to see that movie? And
3.
I don't even remember. Do you remember what the name of it is?
The Sorrow and the Pity.
Yeah, and I've heard of it. I've never seen it. Is it?
It's a documentary on the Holocaust.
Oh, of course it is. And
a 4-hour documentary on the Holocaust, apparently.
4 hours long, yeah. So they're standing in line. They were 2 minutes late to the movie they wanted to see, and he could not go in because he couldn't see it from the beginning to the end. This isn't a man who is neurotic and controlling as all get out. But go ahead.
Yeah. If I were Annie Hall, I would have just gone into the movie without him.
I would have to. Well, me too. I mean, I thought I would have just said, well, you go watch your 4-hour stupid movie and I'm going to go in here. So anyway, they're standing in line and here's this guy behind him talking about Marshall McLuhan's theories. See, media theory. So he's listening to him and the guy keeps going on and on. And he finally turns around and says to him, you don't understand this theory at all. You have it all wrong. And the guy says, well, no. And then they kind of go back and forth a bit. And he goes, no, well, let's just ask Marshall McLuhan. I have him right here. So, and that's one of those scenes that people talk about. I've actually written about this several times. But here's the thing. Marshall McLuhan was an academic and a writer who studied and wrote about media theory. It was theory. His famous book and quote is, "The medium is the message." But the funny thing about him is that nobody really understands his theory. That's why this conversation was happening. They both had completely different explanations for what the theory meant. Marshall McLuhan sides with Woody, but there are a lot of people who take that theory and stand it on its head and say, no, it's just the opposite. But the thing is, it was a popular intellectual what's the word I want? Activity. It was a popular intellectual, pseudo-intellectual activity in the 70s to discuss Marshall McLuhan. And he was taught seriously in schools of journalism. I had a class that taught him. And I've taken that class and I've read chunks of his book and I still don't understand it. I understand the basic thing, but I don't understand the whole theory. It's convoluted and ridiculous. Nobody understands it. Nobody, but Woody Allen thinks that's awesome. And he puts this guy in here as a paragon of intellectualism. When all a lot of us are sitting here saying, but nobody understands this. What's the point? What's the point?
Well, and the scene is a very blatant fantasy realization scene, because like he even at the end of it, after Marshall McLuhan agrees with him, Woody Allen turns to the camera and goes, "Wouldn't it be nice if life were like this?"
Yeah, and that's
because
good.
It's basically
I like that.
Wouldn't it be nice if when you were having a discussion with somebody, you could just pull in the expert and have them say that you were right? Like, yeah, that would be nice. And also, this kind of goes along with what I was saying, which is that Woody Allen writes these worlds so that his character is always the one who's right and is always the one who's the most smart, even if he self-sabotages. And to be honest, like, my take on Alvy as a character is that he's not very smart, because a smart person wouldn't be so obsessed with sex that it's basically the only lens through which they can view a romantic relationship. Romantic relationships are so much more than that, and he literally just cannot step outside of the lens of sex for even a minute to like see Annie as a person and see how she is growing. But also, I don't think a person who is actually intelligent would trap themselves this way, would trap themselves in the mire of their own need to always be right above everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of depressing.
So I did want to talk a little bit about Shelley Duvall's character. It's a pretty short scene.
She's wonderful, though.
But yeah, she is so good in that role.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she just... It's similar to Diane Keaton's performance in that you immediately know who this person is. You've talked to this person. She's kind of like a hippy dippy person who's like very like religious about her enjoyment of rock and roll. And the scene, like in the scene, she's talking about a Bob Dylan song, right? She's talking about Just Like a Woman. Yeah. And she's like quoting it, which I will just say, I think Just Like a Woman is one of his worst, most misogynistic songs.
It is. Yeah.
I've always had a problem with it.
But women from that era loved it, and I have never understood it. But yeah,
I don't know. I don't break just like a little girl, and I can tell you that for certain because I was just hanging out with my friend who has a little girl, and I watched her have a breakdown. That is not how adults have a breakdown.
No.
It is different.
You're making a woman look childlike. Yeah.
Yeah. And you would like, that it's misogynistic because he would never write a song like that about a man, right? It's not just the romantic overture, it's that he is infantilizing the woman in the song, and men don't infantilize other men, they only infantilize women.
Yeah.
So I just thought like it's a weirdly appropriate song for this movie to bring up, because essentially Alvy is okay with Annie Hall as long as she's infantilized, but as soon as she comes into her own, their relationship completely falls apart. There's just a lot of infantilizing of women going on. But I also just wanted to say that, just Shelley Duvall's performance is so great. She's so good at that, like, wide-eyed, hippy-dippy kind of lady.
She is great. And the couple of the characters in here, let's talk about the other actors for just a minute. There are a lot of familiar faces in here. We've already talked about Carol Kane. Woody is known for having a troupe of actors, and Tony Roberts is his most famous one. He's in almost all his movies. Tony Roberts, almost his entire career is in Woody Allen movies. And he just died a couple of years ago. Shelley Duvall is in it, and this is one of her earlier roles.
What's his face? Jeff Goldblum is in it for like a split second.
I was going to get to him, but yeah. So let's do that. So Jeff Goldblum, and I had read recently that his first role was in Annie Hall. And I'd forgotten about it until he shows up on screen. And I mean, it's 3 seconds. And you're blown away because in that 3 seconds, he is Jeff Goldblum. And you can just see this man is going to be a star someday.
And he's so beautiful. Like, every man in the movie up until that point has been, like, average at best. And then Jeff Goldblum shows up, and he's so gorgeous.
Gorgeous. Yeah, that thick, curly hair and his dark tan skin. He is and he has, I don't remember what the line is, but he plays that line really well.
I've forgotten my mantra, I think is the line.
That's it. I got my mantra. And the way he says it, I don't know. It's one of the highlights of the film for me. But anyway, Paul Simon is in this. And there was a period in his career in the late 70s, early 80s where he did act a little bit. And this is one of those roles. He actually made a whole movie called One Trick Pony. We should maybe do it on the podcast sometime. But he... I was laughing at his performance. It was so perfect. He is playing this suave, debonair, too cool for school singer, and he's got it down because Paul Simon is kind of a opposite. His personality is the opposite of this character. He's really acting, and because he is not that person. You think you see it, you think, oh, this must be what Paul Simon's like. No, Paul Simon is kind of an angry young man, even
Yeah.
now in his 80s, and has always been that personality. That's why he and Artie were always fighting, and
Yeah.
he would say it was
And
Art's fault too. But yeah,
his character kind of feels like almost the opposite of Alvy's character, because like it's
mm-hmm.
not just that he's cool, he just seems so nice. Like he's
And
so
laid
nice
back,
and
he's
like
very
kind of soft
relaxed.
spoken. Yeah. Like
Mm-hmm.
the confidence of someone who doesn't need to take over the room to know how cool they
Mm-hmm.
are.
Mm-hmm. And he's smiling, and kind of a lilt to his voice, and he's
Mm-hmm.
just really sweet with her, and yeah, it's a great performance, and I just really enjoyed it. I was a little disappointed that Christopher Walken didn't have more of a role, but
It's a
and
great role,
this was one of his earliest roles, and actually he made the Deer Hunter the next year, so which is a completely different role. And he is a little crazy in the Deer Hunter.
He's
not like in this movie.
Yeah.
really,
yeah, it's
really
a great
insane.
scene though.
Yeah.
He's basically in like, I don't know, 2.5 scenes essentially, because he plays Annie's brother. So Alvy meets the family. He's in this scene where they all have dinner together, but he doesn't really say anything. And then Alvy like wanders into his room afterward or something, and he gives this like kind of crazy monologue about how when he's driving he imagines dying in a fiery crash, and he kind
sometimes
of
I just feel
to.
like taking the steering wheel and turning it right into the oncoming lights.
And then the next scene is he drives them home. Yeah.
He's driving them to the airport, and it's raining and it's nighttime, and Alfie's sitting there, holding on to the car like that's going to protect him, and it is a funny cut from one scene to the next. It's really well done.
That was probably the one scene that like actually came close to dragging a real laugh out of me, probably because I had forgotten it completely.
Yeah, I had forgotten it completely too, so yeah, it was pretty good. So the other actor in this that I have always loved is Colleen Dewhurst. She was one of those famous character actor women. She always played strong women, and like not matronly. That's not the right word, but just strong, independent. And in the 60s and 70s, a lot of times that she was kind of a hippie character, but not always. She's married to George C. Scott. I don't know how long, but they were married a long time, and just a fan. She plays Annie's mother.
Yeah,
and she's just a wonderful actress. She didn't get enough scenes as far as I'm concerned. I wish they'd used her a little bit more. She's always very tense and always very smart. Her characters come across as really smart women. That I don't know if she was able to choose her roles and look for those kind of roles, or she just brought that to any role that she did. But she was a great actress. Died pretty young too. So that's all the actors. My hot take is basically just my whole thinking on this film, which is a big hot take. The movie Annie Hall was a major touchstone in my young life. I just put it right out there. I wanted to be Annie Hall, and I wasn't alone. I thought I was. I thought it was a weird thing, but a lot of women my age who saw this film wanted to be Annie Hall. And, dress like her, live in New York, drive a VW convertible, which I did at some point, and I did dress like her for a long time. I was already a huge fan of movies when I saw this. I was one of those kids who, and I've told Tess this lots of times, but I used to stay home from school when I would see that there was a movie that was listed in the TV guide that was an older movie that I'd never seen, because in the 60s and 70s you couldn't get older movies, except on television, and they were usually on during the daytime. So if I wanted to see it, I had to play hooky from school. And so by the time Annie Hall came out, I was already going to movies on a regular basis. Sometimes Tessa's dad and I would go to double features, which you don't even find anymore, because there were so many good movies that we wanted to see. We would see new movies, but also catch up on old ones, because by the end of the 70s, there were like art house movie theaters that were playing these older movies. repertory movie theaters they would play, a movie for 1 or 2 nights, and they'd switch to another movie, and they would create these calendars, these visual, calendars, and they pass them out every month so people would know what movies were coming.
Well, so back when films were actually only an hour and a half long, you had time to watch too.
Yes. That's true. So anyway, I saw Annie Hall during that period of my life when I was really going to see a lot of movies, and it was I just loved it. I became a huge Woody Allen fan, and was for a long time. Went to see his movies every time they came out until things started to change with his public image, and based on stories and allegations. And it took a while, but it did get to me. So now when I see his films with this new history in mind, I can look at them a little bit more critically. And that's what happened with this film. But it didn't happen with Diane Keaton.
Yeah.
She became one of my favorite actors. She was just a role model and a hero to me, and an influence on me. Even and we talked about this during the last discussion. She was, even as she grew older, she was a role model for growing older. And she had so many interests. She wasn't just an actor. She was, and we talked about this again last time, but she had so many different interests. She was a photographer. She was into fashion. She's really, really an amazing woman. And so I was not wrong. I might have been wrong about Woody Allen, but I was not wrong about Diane Keaton. She was great. I have grown increasingly disillusioned with Woody. With Woody the human, I should say, which makes me sad because of how important this film and many of his other films were to me. Most of those films I will not revisit because I'm sure I would be disappointed all over again seeing things that I can see in Annie Hall, like as we have been discussing today, that I didn't see 49 years ago. So I kind of will never forgive him for taking that away from me. But that's one of my hot takes. And the other one is 2 seconds of Goldblum. Jeff Goldblum is better than no seconds at all.
That's for sure.
That was my other hot take. So that is all I have.
And something that you just said reminded me that I did want to mention. There's a part when Alvy first goes over to Annie's apartment, and he picks up one of her books, which is Ariel by Sylvia Plath. And his comment is that her tragic suicide has been misinterpreted as romantic by, like, basically college girls for decades. And I just want to say, no, it hasn't. No woman that I know. First of all, Sylvia Plath was a fantastic writer.
Brilliant.
And no woman that I know thinks her suicide was romantic. Instead, we see it as a tragedy of misogyny.
Yep,
a tragedy of how the world treats women. So thanks for making a joke out of it, Woody Allen. Well done there.
Yeah.
Sylvia Plath, for those who don't know, basically killed herself because her husband treated her so abysmally, controlled every aspect of her life that he could, cheated on her, made her miserable, and wouldn't let her leave, essentially. And his name was Ted Hughes, and he was a much worse writer than her. And the further tragedy is that he got control over her work for quite a good chunk of time after she died.
He controlled her fortune, which grew after her death. And actually before she died, I think he took their kids away from her, and because she was experiencing mental health problems. But that was a tipping point. And then after her death, he not only controlled her fortune, as you pointed out,
but her work.
Her control of her work. And you know what he did with that control? He kind of set it aside. From what I understand, he would not promote her work.
Yeah.
Because it took away from his career. So
he was jealous of her success.
He was very jealous, and he wasn't the poet she was. And he became this, was he the poet laureate of Britain, maybe? I don't know. He was very popular, not popular, but very well known in the 70s and 80s up until his death. During those years, he never really promoted her work, and this is a big schism actually in the literary world between men and women, and especially among the Brits, because she was an American woman and he was a British man, and they loved him, but Americans hated him. So yeah, it was awful. That was completely off topic, but
that was off topic. But I just wanted to say that I feel like that is yet more misogyny seeping into this script. Anyway, my my hot take is that I think Diane Keaton must have pissed off a bog witch in her youth, because it feels like between this movie and Something's Gotta Give, she was cursed to play characters who are are set against horrendous men. This is in many ways a very different movie from Something's Gotta Give, but in both of them, Diane Keaton is playing this like really likable, fun woman who for some reason is only dating a hideous toad. And by hideous toad, I don't mean physically. I mean personality-wise. Both of these men are horrendous. Alvy is, frankly, a pervert who does not believe in women's consent. And Jack Nicholson's character is largely the same, of a womanizer who keeps dating younger and younger women. I mean, good God. It's not even just that she has to, be with these horrible men, but that these horrible men keep dating younger and younger women. It's just, and I'm being facetious about the witch's curse, but like, the reality is that this is a reflection of our culture. This is a reflection of our need to let men be as creepy as they want to be, and to basically feed them younger and younger women so that they can suck their life force out and keep going. Yeah. And I also think that it is cosmically so unfair that both Shelley Duvall and Diane Keaton preceded Woody Allen in death.
Yeah. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's interesting that we chose those two movies without even realizing ahead of time, and maybe you did.
No, I didn't.
How similar that framework of these two films was going to be. So now I'm thinking, we got to do another movie, not right away, but another Diane Keaton movie where it's just the women.
Yeah. I know you don't want to, but I think we should do First Wives Club.
Let's do First Wives Club. All right, we'll put that on the agenda for January.
All right.
Okay. That, dear listeners, is all for today. This has been Woman Inherits the Earth, a discussion podcast about women and movies from the perspective of a mother and daughter.
I'm Tessa Dare. You can find me at my website, tessadare.com, or you can follow me on Threads at author.tess.adair. If you would like to support us, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/womaninheritstheearth. If you're watching us on YouTube, please make sure to like and subscribe.
And I am Beth Von Barron. You can sign up for my weekly Substack, Saturday Morning Musings, at stlwriterbeth.substack.com. I'm also on Instagram and Threads at stl_writer_Beth, and on Blue Sky at stlwriterbeth.bsky.social. This is our last episode of this fall 2025 season. We will be adjourning for a few weeks. I will be visiting Tess in her hometown of Seattle for the holidays, and then we will be back at it in January. We appreciate every one of you who listens to us on a regular basis. We truly could not do this without our listeners. So thank you for listening. Please join us again in the new year.